Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles and I'm delighted to have with me today as my very special guest author, Janna MacGregor, whose new book is Rules for Engaging the Earl. Before we begin our chat today, I do want to let those tuning in know that the Poison Pen does have copies of Janna's new book, and we would be happy to hold one for you or put it in the mail. Just go online or give us a call at the Poison Pen and we'll put one aside for you. And now I would like to welcome Janna.
Thank you, John. I'm so delighted to be here today. This is going to be a lot of fun. Sundays are my favorite day of the week, so this is perfect.
They're my favorite day too at 5 o'clock.
I bet.
Let's go ahead and get started. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before you began your writing career?
Well, I used to practice law in Kansas City, Missouri, and I did that for, probably about 20 years. And then after, I have triplets, 2 boys and a girl, and after they all left for college, I decided that I wanted to do something different. So I decided that I wanted to write romance, and voila, that's what happened.
Well, I think your journey was a little bit more filled with a few potholes than that. Now, if I understand correctly, you first fell in love with romance books as a teenager, and you credit your mother with installing that love.
Yes, exactly. She was a huge romance reader, and she was a elementary school teacher. And every Friday, all the teachers would come into the teacher's lounge with a big, brown bag of books that they'd either bought at the used bookstore or at the grocery store, et cetera. And so they would have like a swap. And my mom loved Harlequins. And of course, back then, I wouldn't touch them with the 10-foot pole because my mother loved them. But she did bring home this Barbara Cartland book, and it was His Impetuous Duchess. And I read it, fell in love with the genre. And then I started, doing like historical research of England, going back to the days of the War of the Roses, and then moving my way forward. And I just fell in love with the Regency period. It's there's a lot of bad things about it, but there's a lot of great things about it. It truly was a time of enlightenment, meaning, scientific literature, critical thinking, medicine, all of those things kind of, exploded at that time. And so it was really kind of like our first vision of what modern day society might look like in the future. So that's why I really, really loved it.
It was far enough away to be glamorous, but close enough for us to identify with people in that time period.
Exactly. That's a perfect way of putting it.
Now, you were working as an attorney, and if I understand correctly, you've often said that being an attorney provided a good foundation for writing romance because it taught you perseverance, hard work, and asking the right kind of questions. Can you elaborate?
Well, I think, it's kind of like what the promise of romance is. And I know that sounds crazy, but the idea of it is when clients come into your office with a legal problem, they are looking for that solution that's going to make them happy. And so as an attorney, you're trying to work through that within the confines of the law and precedent and all those type of things to get that result for them. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But in romance, we always know that you'll always have a happily ever after or a happily for now. And, in the best of both worlds, a good attorney can actually do that happily for now.
So you decided to write, and I think it was around 2013 that you began your first, what would become your first romance novel, or the foundation for it. Yours was not an overnight success story, was it?
Well, I don't know. I think that I was very fortunate.
Okay.
In what I did. And I'll tell you why. My first book was The Bad Luck Bride, and I wrote it in 45 days. Really? And what was interesting about it is I had no idea how to write a romance. I mean, as an attorney, you know how to write. I don't want to call it a formula, but you know that you have to hit certain points. Yes, exactly. And a romance has that exact same thing, but there were a lot of other things in writing that I really didn't. There's a huge difference between writing legal briefs and memos versus writing a piece of fiction. And I took that time for about 2 years, and I entered every contest that I could find to get feedback. Took a lot of craft classes, etc. And once I felt, and I actually found a private editor to help me, put this book into shape. And once I felt that I had it in a good shape, then I got an agent, and then an agent submitted it. And I'm happy to say that within 2 weeks, St. Martin's had made me an offer for The Bad Luck Bride and the first 3 books in the Caversham Era series. So I think in many ways I'm very, very lucky. I didn't have a lot of rejection at that particular point in time, but with any author's writing career, you'll have rejection, or you'll have different paths that you think that you're going to take that actually lead you someplace else. So
It seems like the way you described it sounds like it happened very fast, but I think if I am listening correctly, you actually put a lot of hard work before you submitted into the publisher. So
yes.
That's why it seemed like it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I had a lot of friends that were also writing romance, because I joined writing communities within the Kansas City area. And so many of them would submit, one book after another, and they wouldn't get the call. And I just, I learned a lot from their experience. You got to make certain that you feel comfortable with what you're putting out there. So.
Now let's shift gears a little bit. Your new book is Rules for Engaging the Earl, and it's part of your Widow's Rules series. Can you tell us a little bit about the idea behind the series and about the new book?
Well, I used to practice family law, and this idea just popped into my head, and I can't really tell you why, but I always thought, wouldn't it be hysterical if 3 women discovered that they were married to the same man, and what would happen? And this was before, I've got notes on this from way, way back. And so I said, well, I'm just going to go ahead and create this world. And so it's literally 3 women walk into a solicitor's office for the reading of a will, and their husband's will, and they discover that they were married to the same man. And who we think is the legitimate wife may or may not be, and you don't find out about that until the end of the first book. And the first book is called Duke in Time. And when the female protagonist, her name's Catherine, meets these women, she doesn't want to have anything to do with them. But then her companion, who's practically raised her, said, you could be one of these women. You could be in this exact same position. And Kat's a very empathetic person. And so she looks at these women and says, yep, I definitely could be. So they form this friendship, trying to decide where their lost dowries are, because this guy, this trigamist that married them, took all of their dowries. There's no money, nothing. And they're just left here with this scandal, and they're trying to rebuild their lives. And so that's what the concept of the entire series is. And there's actually an arc that goes through all 3 books. And I'm actually working on the last one in the series of what's happened to their dowry. So you'll find out what's happened to them in the 3rd book.
Now, you mentioned your love for the Regency era. And what I love about the Widow's Rules series is you do kind of capture part of the kind of the glamour, the elegance of the Regency time period, but you also take readers in some unexpected places. We're not in London, we're in different parts of England. You're dealing with women who actually are involved in business. They're not just dancing at balls and shopping on Bond Street and all those other things. They're very real to people today because they have those kind of depth and nuances to them. Can you talk about why you wanted to explore, I guess, the other side of the Regency world?
Well, I think I've always, it's a misconception that women didn't work during the Regency. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is, when women married, no matter what class they were in, it was basically an economic decision. Because a single woman, even if she worked as a seamstress or as a vendor on the street, it was very hard for them to actually make a living. And of course, they didn't have any legal rights back then. Mm-hmm. And so it was to their benefit to marry. And I like to think that it's important to portray women not only as being, having their own agency and being independent and making their own decisions, but it's also to show that many of the problems that they had back then, we still have today. From the standpoint of being seen as equals, et cetera. But one of the and I do want to touch upon this, the misconception that women didn't work, particularly at the upper levels of society, is just dead wrong. It's just dead wrong. And, one of the famous people that I love to compare it to is Lady Jersey of the Almack's venue, where they would have these debutante balls and the doors locked at 11 o'clock, and it didn't make any difference whether you were Wellington. If you got there at 11:01, you weren't getting into the doors, which actually happened to the Duke. But Lady Jersey actually owned a bank back then, and nobody ever really talks about that. And there were all sorts of people that work like that. So I that's one of the things that I like to do. And with Catherine in that first book, A Duke in Time, she creates her own business. With Constance, with Sandra, who is the widow in this one, I mean, she had inherited her business from her parents after they had passed away. And so she's very committed to that. That's the way that she keeps her love alive for her parents. And she wants to take this business. It's an outrigging. It takes place in Portsmouth. And she wants to give it to her daughter that she has. And Portsmouth was actually a lot of fun to write, because that's where the British Navy, that's where their stronghold was. That's where they kept all that stuff. So it's a very busy port town, and all sorts of different types of folks are there. So it's fun to write about. London's great. We all love to read about London, but sometimes it's fun to get out and investigate the rest of the world, or at least the rest of England.
You also, I think, very deftly touch upon, for your hero in the book, the real issues about being a soldier in Regency time periods, because we think about PSTD a lot today for soldiers recently in wars or even the Vietnam era, but it affected people back then too. And you kind of addressed that a little bit in your book.
Yeah, I did. Jonathan, the name of the male protagonist is Jonathan Eaton. He is the Earl of Sykeston. And for those folks that read my books, he first appeared in The Bride Who Got Lucky, and he was a huge favorite of readers. I would get letters constantly asking if he was going to get his own story. They wanted to see it, etc. And I actually wrote this book twice, and this was in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic when we were all in lockdown, and it turned so dark because we were in such dark times. I was like, my editor was just fantastic about this. I wrote her and said, I just can't give you this book. It's too dark. I've got to change it. And so I actually wrote it twice, which is funny because I wrote The Bride Who Got Lucky twice too. So it's funny how these themes come together. But Jonathan is, they practiced war, or war was so different back then because there was this concept of honor. And I talk about this, and there's a little author's note about the gentleman that had a chance to shoot George Washington in the back, and he refused to do it because that goes against honor and their rules of engagement, really. Back then in the Revolutionary War and in the Peninsular Wars. And so Jonathan has all of this, and then his commanding officer takes it and turns it against him. And so not only is he injured coming home, but he's got all of this guilt and all of this angst that's just kind of hanging over him. And he's really in a dark place. And it's only through Constance that he starts seeing the light. But as what happens, you go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and, that dance goes on for a while. But I think that that's really true with PTSD. And my female protagonist in The Bride Who Got Lucky, Claire, had PTSD from something traumatic that she had seen. And I'd actually talked to a psychologist about that before I wrote that book. And in Jonathan's case, I actually talked to a doctor of rehabilitative medicine who deals with the long-term effects of catastrophic injuries like gunshots, stabbing, and everything that would go along with it. I mean, truthfully, if Jonathan had been a real person back then, he probably would not have survived. But it's fiction, it's romance. And so, of course, I'm going to have him, survive it and come back to Constance. So.
And I don't want to scare readers off because you do have moments of humor in the book. You have some kind of very dry sense of humor. I can't think of the butler's name, but
North.
Yeah.
North.
He was particularly fun.
Yeah, and North was in The Bride Who Got Lucky too. And his character was really crafted there because when Emma, the female protagonist, goes to see Jonathan in Portsmouth, he's not there, and North is very upset. He's crying. He obviously loves this man so much, and he's so happy Emma's there. But it's just like a parent. Once they'll only put up with so much until they'll give you a kick and say, you need to turn your life around. And North definitely does it. I mean, he's just the perfect instigator matchmaker in this. So he's good. He was a lot of fun.
He's a delightful character. Let's talk a little bit about research methods, because you do write historical romance. You have to get those details right in the story. Do you have particular sources that you find useful? Can you talk about researching a book? And what has surprised you as you've written, I think, is it 6 books now?
No, this makes my 8th full length. Yeah.
What has surprised you the most that you've discovered about the Regency era?
Well, I wish you could see. I mean, I am surrounded by bookcases all around me, and they are just filled with all of my various books. But my very favorites are over to my left, and they are basically all about marriage and property rights and legal rights that were crafted. And here in the United States, our common law is based upon English common law, and so many of the things that were true back then are true today. Thankfully, though, a lot of the bad things have changed. For instance, obviously, in marriage, a woman gave up all of her property, all of her rights, and it all came, I think what really is surprising to me was how much influence the church had back then, because I just didn't really believe, or I didn't realize the extent of it. But the church had taken the standpoint that based upon what had been taught from the Bible, that when a couple would join together in a union, they became one person, one entity. And so when the church said that, they expected all of the woman's rights to go into their husband's domain, and that included all their property rights. There was no such thing as divorce back then. I mean, there was divorce, but it was a very expensive endeavor, and it was only the wealthy that could really get into marriage, and it was always the woman that had to bear the brunt of that economic and social ruination. And that's kind of one of the points that when you look at today, it's gotten a lot better. But if there are children involved economically, I would say the vast majority of the women are the ones that suffer in a divorce economically. And so, some things never change, but a lot of things do change. So, we're moving on. But
I think that's right. I was surprised because I was watching some show or something, and I did not realize, or maybe I was too young, but even up into the 1970s, women could not apply for a bank loan or own a home, or, I mean, all these things were tied into, you had to have a man.
Right. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. Now, rumor has it that you don't like to set any of your books in the years 1816 to 1817. Is there a particular reason why?
Yeah, there was this huge volcano, and I forgot where it was. I want to say it was in the Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
This huge volcano erupted, and it was so large. The eruption was so large that all of that ash, kind of covered the world, and it really came into the UK into the British Isles, and it was called The Year Without Summer. And literally, you know, there were crop failures because it never was warm enough for the crops to fully mature, which, you know, had devastating effects, not only on the food supply, but economically, there was nothing to trade, et cetera. And so it took, you know, a long time for that to happen. And I think it's just kind of, I don't know. I wouldn't want to have a year without sunshine or warmth or anything. So it's just kind of depressing. So I just don't even deal with it. Which is funny because I live in Minneapolis and we, you know, we've had just constant cloudy weather here for a while.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about series, because The Widow's Rules is your second series. Your first was the Cavendish Harris's. Now, for those listening in, series are a little bit different in the romance world. You don't have to read things consecutively necessarily. Each book kind of does stand on its own, but there are connections between the books. When you're writing a series, do you always know how things are going to play out? Do you sometimes find yourself having to go back and rewrite things? Talk about writing a series from your author's perspective.
Well, with my first series, that Cavendish Heiresses, I knew that I needed to have a family because I did want it to be a 6-book series. And I created this family, a Duke and Duchess, and they had 3 children, and then they had to, you know, in essence, adopted their niece who had lost their parents. So there were 4 kids there. And I had a villain in the first book that I knew that I wanted to write a redemption story for. So that's 5. So I'm messed up because if I wanted 6 books, I didn't have enough people. And so my very last book in that series, it's called Wild Wild Rake. It's about a virgin vicar who falls in love with this, you know, kind of a grumpy Marchioness who's a widower, And I had to create in Rogue Most Wanted those characters because I was like, I don't have these people. So, well, actually, Devin Ferris showed up in The Good, the Bad, and the Duke, which was book 4. And he was kind of like a comic, you know, just comic effect. And then it was like, oh my gosh, I need him. I really need him. And that was difficult because people are very opinionated about vicars and whether they like them or not. And I don't know that I'll ever tackle one of those again.
Really?
Yeah. You know, I got mail from people saying that I should have made him more religious. I got email from people that said that it was too religious. And to me, that book was not religious at all. I mean, there was this concept of good and evil and why bad things happen to people, but I didn't think it was, you know, like that. But, you know,
Who knew?
Yeah. So.
What is your own, when you're approaching a book, what is your writing process like? Because I know for a lot of, especially mystery writers, you need to have your motive, your suspects and everything plotted out. So some of them are very detailed. Others are kind of, I'll start and see where it goes. Do you have your own approach?
I do. I'm a huge plotter. And if you can tell, I'll kind of see if I can lift this up a little bit. That's my plotting board right behind.
Oh, good heavens.
Yeah. And so when I start a book or I'm writing a book, I go through and I try to outline everything that I can. Of course, some stuff makes it into the book, some stuff doesn't. Some new ideas, some new characters come in, and I think that's just part of the writing process. But whenever I get stuck, I mean, I've got good writing friends that I can call up and say, help, and they're right there. So I'm very fortunate.
Now, in addition to all of your own projects, I was very impressed to find out that you had something else that you've been working on this year, a charity writing project called the Sunflower Season.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was, I came up in here, I'm just going to show you the picture of the thing. So
it's a gorgeous cover.
Yeah, it really is. And it was donated. Everything's been donated for this project. So all proceeds will go to 2 humanitarian aid societies to help support women, children, and the elderly in Ukraine. But it's, I just got to thinking, and I contacted one of my friends, Annabelle Enders, and I said, hey, would you help me put this idea together? I think we could get something going on this. And she goes, sure, sure. Anne is an indie author. And so she's got all these wonderful tools that she knows how to, get on to Amazon and Barnes and Noble to put this stuff up. She does all of that kind of stuff. And then we came together and just asked, a lot of our friends, would you like to participate in this? And I mean, nobody said no. Nobody said no. And it's amazing. So we're very, very pleased with it. It releases June 7th. Over 70 historical romance authors are participating in it. So it's exciting.
And if those listening in want to purchase a copy, they can find it on all the usual places.
Yes, it's sold and internationally everywhere. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Kobo, you name, Amazon UK and all around. So it's there.
That's wonderful. Let's switch gears a little bit, because I always am on the lookout for something to read, good to read. So what have you read that you'd like to share, and what might be on your summer reading list this year?
Oh, okay. Well, I will tell you that I am a huge Katie Robert fan, and her Dark Olympus series is just phenomenal. I mean, I can't recommend that enough. It's dark, it's sexy. It takes those Greek myths and just turns them on their head, but they're just beautiful. They're set in a contemporary. The first one is Neon Gods. The second one is Electric Idol. The third one, which comes out June 7th, is called Wicked Beauty, and I can't wait for that one. I just finished, tested Bailey's, latest, that Hook, Line, Sinker. Loved it. I loved it so much. I hadn't read the first one, so I went back and read It Happened One Summer. If you can't tell, I'm on a contemporary kick right now. I'm reading, I just finished Beauty and the Baller by Ilsa Madden Mills. I thought that one was perfection. I'm currently reading Lorraine Heath's Girls of Flight City, and I just love it. Anything that Lorraine Heath puts out, grab it. She is just, the way that she writes, her language, the way she tells the story, it's perfection. So, and this is fun because it's a different, it's a women's fiction book, and it's set in World War II, so it's a little bit different than her regular things. What I'm looking forward to also is A Duke for Diana by my good friend Sabrina Jeffrey. She's awesome. And then one thing I'm going to share with you is, if it's okay, I am the president of the Regency Fiction Writers Group, and it is an international organization that supports fiction writers in romance, mystery, fantasy, paranormal. We've got close to 400 members worldwide, and we have this huge conference that is virtual, and it starts this summer, the 16th, 17th, and 18th. And we have several academics coming in, and one of them is a gentleman by the name of Brian A. Garner, and he is a huge legal, a well-respected legal researcher, writer, and he's actually the editor of Black's Law Journal, which, if anybody that's an attorney or deals with law knows that that's like the go-to, that you have to have that if you're doing any type of writing. But he wrote a book that's coming out in May called Taming the Tongue. And what he's done is that he does a study of how contentious grammarians were back in the 18th and 19th century, and how they fought and how grammar changed because of all of these things. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that, who knows, maybe that will end up in a romance novel.
That's a nonfiction book, I'm gathering.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. Now, the Regency Fiction Writers Group, have they been around for a while?
It used to be the old Beaumont of
Okay.
the
RWA.
Romance Writers of America, but it disaffiliated from the group in early 2020.
Okay.
And so this makes our third year being independent and doing this. So, and that's where I get a lot of my research from, because there's so many people there that knows everything.
Yeah, if you need to find out anything about the Regency Era, there's someone there that knows that particular subject.
And if they don't know, they can tell you where to go to find out.
Yes.
So that's good. That's good.
Now, what's next for you as an author? Can you share anything with us?
Oh, sure. I'm finishing up the third book in the Widow Rule series is called How to Best the Marquess. And it's the story of the third widow, Beth Howell. And then the male protagonist is Julian Raleigh, who is the Marquess of Grayson. And he actually appeared in Rogue Most Wanted. So it's trying to tie all those series together. And I created a character in this last book that I think I'm going to take into a new series. I've actually written a book about his sister. So I'm going to take that and go into that area. And then I don't know, we'll see. We'll see what else is going on. So, I've got a lot of things in the fire.
How can readers find out more about you and your books? Are you on particular social media platforms?
You bet. I'm on Facebook as Janna MacGregor. I have a Facebook group called Janna MacGregor's Lords and Ladies of Langham Hall that you can join. I'm on Instagram as Janna MacGregor. And I have a website, jannamacgregor.com, that you can go and find, what I'm working on, what I'm doing. And join my newsletter. I send out newsletters, at least once a month. So I like getting in contact with my readers. So I'd love to hear from you.
Well, I can't believe we've already run through all of our time. You've just been a delightful guest. Janna MacGregor, her new book is Rules for Engaging the Earl. It just came out recently, I believe.
On May 26th. Or wait, April 26th.
I know, days tend to blur.
What's the matter with me?
I can't thank you enough for taking time to join us. And for those listening in, thank you for attending another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Had a delightful time.
Thank you.